we're going to be swapping out the FlexPlate on an 87 S10 Chevy. It's quite simple. You just, unscrew these three from the torque converter and unscrew the center from the crankshaft. Quite simple. But there's one hitch. You gotta drop the tranny first. Alright, if you're wondering why we have to do this, it's because we have the wrong FlexPlate on the engine we've got in the car. Now I'm gonna show you what the wrong FlexPlate does for this car. Ooh. Alright, when we start the car in an idle position, it shakes a lot. Kind of like a hooker on crack. Now we have the camera resting on the steering wheel. Obviously you can see how bad the shaking is from this vantage point. It actually makes more sense. Alright, in order to get the transmission off, we've got to take everything off the engine that might break when we drop the transmission. To start, we're going to take off the air cleaner and all of its lovely hoses. Now that we've got the top of the air cleaner off, we can lift up the bottom and unhook everything. The air cleaner comes off. It should look relatively like this. The next thing we want to do is get this distributor cap out of the way so it doesn't break. All you need to do is pull it up and move it to the side. There's really no reason to disconnect all of these spark plug wires. The final thing we need to do, now don't hate me for this, is we got to pull the fan off so it doesn't go through the radiator if the engine does decide to drop too fast. So, you may not need to do this, but it's better safe than sorry. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take off this fan cowl. Alright, now with all these bolts removed, you should theoretically be able to take this fan cowl off. Might get hitched on a few things on the way out. But it's out. Alright, now with the fan is exposed as Lindsay Lohan in Playboy, we have access to the 4 fan bolts, and we can just take those off with a regular wrench. To prevent the fan from moving when you break the nuts, just hold it in place with a pry bar. Once you get the nuts off, the fan will come right out, and the radiator core will be safe. This right here is the exhaust crossover. As you can see, it's in the way of everything else. So we have to unbolt it from the manifolds up here, as well as on the other side, and here from the catalytic converter. First thing you need to do is to spray liquid wrench around where the manifold bolts are. Now you just let that sit a while. If they're really tight, you can always use heat. Whatever you do, don't shear the bolts. Don't forget to disconnect the O2 sensor. In order to clear the frame, you might actually have to take the O2 sensor off. Now to get to the manifold bolts, you're going to use a socket wrench with a really freaking long extension. For some of these, you're going to want to use the universal joint. Now that the crossover is unbolted from the manifold, we can unhook the catalytic converter to remove the unit. To remove the transfer case, you need to remove the drive shaft. Here we have a drive shaft. Now we want to take the rear drive shaft off. The same manner. Once you've removed the drive shaft from the rear differential, you can slide it backwards and remove it from the transfer case. Alright. You'll notice here the white paint on the back end of the drive shaft. This is so you can put it in the same way it came out. The next thing we're going to do is drain the fluid from the transfer case so it can be removed. Next, we want to remove the vacuum lines, the shift lever, and the speedometer cable from the transfer case so it can be safely removed. Now the speedometer cable. To take the transfer case off, you also have to remove the shifter in the car. This piece bolts into the transmission, which is why it needs to be removed before removing the transmission. Next, we need to raise the transmission slightly so we can unbolt the transfer case. So to do that, we're going to use this transmission jack from Harbor Freight to do this. Next step to removing the transfer case is to get these transmission mounting bolts off. Last bolt is out. You take this transmission mount out. Get stuck, just raise the transmission a bit further. Now we want to remove our transfer mounting bolts. We're going to start here at the low one while the transmission is actually up. Now that the bottom mounting bolts are off the transfer case, we can lower the transmission and slowly lower the transmission and get the remaining mounting bolts. So before you unbolt the remaining mounting bolts on the transfer case, you want to jack it up with a floor jack. With all the mounting bolts removed, you can now carefully remove the floor jack and use the transmission jack to support while removing the transfer case. Now we're going to slowly take down the transmission jack. And here is the transfer case. The next thing we want to do is take off the inspection plate. Now with the inspection plate removed, we have access to the torque converter and the FlexPlate, which is what we came here to do originally. Well, almost. Using a pry bar, we can turn the torque converter so we can expose these 3 bolts and undo them. And now you use the pry bar to hold the flywheel in place while you loosen these bolts. Now with the torque converter bolts out, it spins free. If only we could get a wrench up there and take the center bolts out, this would be really easy. But we can't, so now we have to drop the transmission. And now we need to go remove more things in the way of our transmission, such as the dipstick and the shifter linkage. Next, we need to remove the throttle cable, which does connect to the transmission. Now, we support the engine with a jack, so we can keep it away from the firewall when we drop the transmission. Now we're going to move the transmission jack so we can remove the cross member and lower the transmission. Now with the transmission slightly raised and securely supported, we can remove the cross member. With the cross member removed, the exhaust comes out easily. Now we are ready to lower the transmission so we can remove the bell housing bolts and the cooler lines. Now is a good time to get the cooler lines off. To get to the top bell housing bolt, use a really freaking long ratchet extension and a universal joint. When I'm doing the bell housing bolts, always work from the top to the bottom. Now with the bell housing bolts unscrewed, pull the transmission back just a little bit and lower it. Now we are free to move the transmission, and we can easily access these center bolts on the FlexPlate. All we gotta do is take out this last bolt here, give it a couple of whacks, and it comes right out. This is what we spent all day getting out. Welcome to FlexPlate 101. Back when GM first made their small block engines, they did not have room in the crankshaft to properly balance the engine. So they welded everything on the outside, as you can see. Here, with this older one, there's a metal plate welded on the back and metal missing from the top. As with the newer one, not so much. Around 1987, they learned how to internally balance their engines. They put in different metals at different weights. Therefore, this one, with the metal welded on the back, was not needed. This one was. When we originally got the engine, it did not come with a FlexPlate. We did not know it was an internally balanced engine. So we used the FlexPlate that came with the car, which was meant for an externally balanced engine. The only way to tell for sure if you're internally balanced is to check the crankshaft casting number on the crankshaft. The moral of the story is always check, double check, triple check, just know. Because it really takes no time at all to put the right one in, but it takes 2 days to take the wrong one out. Now let's go put the right one in. FlexPlate is almost in. We just need to torque this last bolt here. Note that the pry bar is through the FlexPlate and holding itself in, helping me torque it. Installation is the reverse of removal. Thank goodness I have my amp overdrive from AutoZone. The first thing we're going to put back is the transmission. Be careful not to pull out the torque converter too much when you're working with it. To make sure it's properly engaged, it should turn hand tight without coming out. So right now we have the transmission in and the exhaust is in place. Now it's time to put the transfer case back. Now we have the transfer case on. Now it's time to put the drive shafts on. Now the drive shafts are in. With all that finished, it's time to put back the shift lever. We have everything under the car put back together. Now we're tightening the last bolt under the hood. To finish the job, we replace the fluid we drained from the transfer case and top off the transmission. Now that everything's put back together, we can start up the car and see how it really runs. Beautiful, it's just beautiful. Now we have the camera resting on the steering wheel. Obviously you can see how bad the shaking is from this vantage point. It actually makes more sense. Alright, so today we're going to be swapping flex plates on an 87 Chevy S10 with a different motor in it. It's really kind of simple. You just unbolt these three from the Today we're going to be swapping out the flex plate on a 87 S. Alright, in case you're wondering why we have to do this, well, when I start the car, it rattles. Kind of like Michael J. Fox on a good day. Alright, the first thing you need to do is spray liquid wet. Next thing, what the f*** you say? Guess depending how fast this is gonna come out. Now we will position the transmission jack so we can cross member and lower the transmission. We can what the? Welcome to FlexPlate 101. Around 1987, they learned how to internally balance their crankshafts. So in 1987, there was a turnaround year. Some of the I'll edit this out.